there are all of these strange forms. To me, they look like creatures.
It needs a little extra energy, a little extra pop, blood, you know, I think.
Blood.
Yeah, I think that's what that orange.
Nature in our lives at this time is playing games with all of us.
Yeah.
In this particular show, we've got two-dimensional works on paper and then a sculpture piece of mixed media.
That works.
Okay. Can you describe, let's start with the three-dimensional work.
I title of it is Log 7 because it's the 7th log piece I've done. We were in New York City and saw an exhibition of coffins made from trees. And on the inside, there was all sorts of objects and things in there that I guess would be with the dead afterwards. And I was just infatuated with the idea of a log containing things. So what I wanted to do was to be able to allow someone to look inside a log and to see something inspiring or puzzling. I tend to appreciate ambiguity. What I did is I cut a sheet of very thick acrylic that I sandwiched in there. And obviously I had to cut out the hole that would be the same as the hole inside the log, so that when I installed the peephole, you could look and light could come in through the acrylic. But then there's something inside, and that's a whole separate deal. It's usually a found object that has been manipulated in some way. And then I also dress the inside of the log to some degree. So it's matching up all of those things. I can't remember exactly where I got that piece of that trunk. But at any rate, it was sitting on the garage floor and it rained and the watermark appeared. And then I decided, well, this is pretty good. And so I kind of enhanced it with both sort of whitewashed the upper part of it and then actually reddened, added pigment to the bottom part.
And Jennifer, the pieces that you have in the show, which are mixed media based, tell us about them, about the materials you're choosing and the subject matter.
Right, so I describe them as collage drawings. Whenever I'm traveling, I take photographs of trees, of architecture, different things, and then I print them out on photocopies and I rip them up. So I have these bags, collections of just bits of natural shapes or architectural shapes, and then I piece them together either on paper or a panel to create a kind of tree that has the human imprint embedded in it. So it could be a tree or a landscape, but it's about the human impact on the landscape. So I'm collaging those in as well as other decorative papers, and then I use colored pencil to connect them to kind of make them more holistic image, so it's more painting-like rather than your traditional collage.
Can you talk a little bit more about the human imprint?
The trees may have like bars embedded in them, like some things I photograph. I've been photographing recently. I lived in Long Beach and just recently moved up here. And so when I was in Long Beach, I was photographing the Port of LA or this bridge construction. So there's a lot of like rebar and things like that, construction elements, very hard, like concrete, metal, things like that. And so you don't exactly know how they got there. Was the tree there first and then people were building on it to use it for their own purposes, and then was it abandoned and left to kind of grow and become itself? And there's also these kind of red lines that are in a lot of my work, which are actually derived from a security gate in Chinatown. I imagine in my landscapes, time had passed after people sort of put their imprint into the landscape, and then these things sort of grew together and sort of fused. Element, yeah.
This one over here is kind of like a tree house in the hallway.
Yeah, I think of that too. I think of tree houses too. I often think of them as, some of my pieces, I think of them as like maybe people had lived in them, like it was an apartment skyscraper or something, or even I think of termite mounds, like, or colonies inside a thing of just huge populations inside a living thing.
It sounds like you both tell yourself stories about the objects that you're making. For example, Noel's log coffins that became something else.
Yeah. Well, the rock paintings, they're all rock forms from a place called the Alabama Hills. And I feel like the title is kind of a red herring because it's not in Alabama. It's here in California, right at the base of Mount Whitney. So the Alabama Hills are actually remnants of a separate mountain range. And so there are all of these strange forms. To me, they look like creatures. And the only myth I've ever read about it was the myth of a giant coming out of there. And I could absolutely see that, one of those things coming to life and terrorizing everyone. It's a really weird place. But so basically I run around there and I photograph configurations of rock that I find interesting, and I take the photographs home and I print out all of them that I think may be possible. And then I have all kinds of rules about how I work, which is sort of a balance between hard rules and places where you can improvise. And so I paint a wash that's a rough, and then I come in with the points. I had a friend once teach me about calligraphy and this whole idea of sort of thinking before you made your mark. And I kind of do that with the dots. I'm aware of it. But of course I don't meditate each one because there are thousands of them. And doing it, I'm seeing all kinds of funny shapes and stuff in there. And I sometimes diverge and add something or leave a lot of stuff out until I get to a point where it's like finished. But when I found that place and started doing this body of work, I thought like, wow, I can just do this forever. This will be fine.
Actually, the pieces I've made this past year, there's direct reference to Ireland. This larger piece was inspired by a residency I did in 2019, just a few months before lockdown. And so there's a myth, an old belief that's still some people believe today, that it's a portal to the other world where the fairies reside. And so if you cut a branch off that tree, if you manipulate it in any way, cut it down, or if your cattle graze on it, bad luck is going to come to you. You leave that thing alone. And so I'd taken a photo of this one hawthorn tree, and I've used it over and over and over again in like pretty much all my work I've made this past year. And so the large piece, there's like kind of a grassy foreground. And so there's literally photographs of that grass from that same photo, but also other papers. So that was a direct reference to that landscape, to that place, and to that myth. And I really love this taboo that's set, as a respect for that tree. It's not there for our purposes. We are to respect it for itself.
The power of nature in our lives at this time is playing games with all of us.
Yeah.
Let's go back to your process, Jennifer, a little bit. Do you have rules that you play by?
I do try to have a balance between sort of a conscious control and letting it flow and play. So when I start a piece, I might have a vague idea, like I want to make a landscape, or I want to make a tall tower, or populate a few, and then I start collaging bits in. But I do let the thing breathe and find itself. And there is actually a lot of taking away. There are areas I don't like, and I will literally try to sandpaper out or get out my knife and cut it out, or use gesso to cover it up. So there's a lot of push and pull and adding and subtracting. But it really is essentially a process, like process painting, letting the happy mistakes happen. If I over control it, then it's just, the magic isn't there, the mystery isn't there.
Yeah, we're both sort of reacting to the work in progress. The 3 a.m. wake up and the stuff that is going on in your brain in those early morning hours. So often, the answer is there, and in a way, or you come across it in those times, and then you know what to do.
Do you have rules with your palette? It's a very specific, it seems to me, palette.
The Alabama Hills are really coarse, and when you look at them closely, you see a lot of colors in there. And so I'm not trying to actually recreate exactly the color. I mean, and there's also like lichen and stuff on them, and there's sort of a polish that happens with weathering and that kind of thing. So I try to kind of reference all of that. But I like to mix. It's not so much, there's a little mixing on the palette, but there's also mixing by putting dots of color next to one another visually.
And Jennifer, your palette is very lively, I would say. I mean, I think, this.
No, I love that. Somebody has a word like that.
I don't think anyone said that before.
Really?
I like it.
There are accents of these hot orange colors.
They're primarily influenced by the imageries that I've glued in there to start with and started building. And then eventually, if it's looking a little dull to me, then it needs a little extra energy, a little extra pop, or blood, or, I think,
Blood.
I think that's what that orange. I think of, like electricity or fire, or like blood, like the life in the thing. Essentially, even though it's an architectural element, it's literally a metal beam, but there's something about that color that gives it fire.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just needs something.
It just needs that
warm it up.
extra punch. Yeah.
I do hope that the people that are listening can make it to the gallery and see these works in person, because their materiality, their quality is quite extraordinary when you see them, and you can really appreciate the hand that went into making them. And I want to thank you both for having this conversation today. It's been very, very fascinating.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for running in here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.